Who's been to KFC before? Usually the hands got really, really slow. It was on my old KFC days, and it was, back in the day. So at a time in my life when I had enough pocket money to sort of be pretty excited about spending it, when I was kind of had enough responsibility in order to be able to go out and spend it, KFC in Australia launched the Tower Burger. And so I hopped on my bike and I went down to get the meal. I wasn't just going to get the Tower Burger, I wanted the meal. Because the advertising that they had this massive Tower Burger and pancakes with coming rice.
You want me?
Do you want to cut rice in? Let's cut rice in. Woo! Yeah, I'll get rice. Nothing like embarrassing people like that. So this Tower Burger and a massive chips. And so I went down there and I said, can I please have my Tower Burger meal? And they gave me the Tower Burger meal, and I couldn't find an ad from back in the day. I should have planned for this presentation more, I know, taking a clipping from the paper at the time. But it kind of looked like the one that's on the right-hand side there. Does anyone remember the Tower Burger? I don't think KFC is, no. Anyway. So this monstrous thing, and you look at it and you just go, my gosh, that thing is like the size of a can of Pepsi.
Hey, it's Andrew, and this is Safety on Tap. Since you're listening in, you must be a leader wanting to grow yourself and drastically improve health and safety along the way. Welcome to you. You're in the right place. If this is your first time listening in, thanks for joining us, and well done for trying something different to improve. And of course, welcome back to all of you wonderful regular listeners. I'm shaking things up again in this episode with another kooky idea of mine. I love getting out and about amongst people, whether that be in workshops or team sessions or coaching or conferences. When it comes to conferences, I'm getting more and more insistent about my views about what a good event looks and sounds and feels like. What I mean is that there's no shortage of information out there. Regular listeners will have heard me say that many times. So paying lots of money to sit in a room to listen to live real-time content delivery, it isn't bad. It's just not optimized for this day and age. So when I'm invited to contribute to a conference or event, I tend to prefer and try to influence interactive sessions like panel discussions and roundtables and facilitated activities, where you can tap into way more social and experiential learning. Having said that, I still do the odd keynote presentation, but it's never without some form of interaction. So it's kind of ironic that in this episode, I'm giving you a presentation which I delivered in 2018 at the National Safety Convention here in Australia. I recorded the presentation live, which you heard at the beginning, but as you heard, the sound quality isn't great, and the interactive parts of that session don't lend themselves to a podcast. So it needs a little adaptation. I had great feedback on the content, so I hope it's helpful. But in the spirit of interaction, I encourage you, when I suggest, to pause and to reflect. Don't just keep listening all the way through. I encourage you to post a comment over at safetyontap.com/EP105 and let's discuss. I encourage you to share this with someone who you think might benefit. But most of all, I encourage you to have a real conversation with someone close to you to reflect and share and challenge and make sense of some of the ideas that you hear in this episode. The other important thing that you need to know is that this session was designed for delivery in person, which includes how the visuals that I used fit with the words that I say and what we do. So I've also recorded this with those visuals so you can see what I mean. So if you're listening to this on iTunes or Stitcher or a podcast player, if you want to get the visuals, then head over to safetyontap.com/EP105 where you can see the video version to capture all of that goodness. It's a great learning hack to improve how your brain takes all of this in to combine visual and audio. Anyway, here's 19 non-health and safety things to improve health and safety, which is picking up now at my Kentucky Fried Chicken story. So we're here at Kentucky Fried Chicken. You can imagine my disdain when I received my ordered Tower Burger along with drink and chips to find that it was about half the size of that can of drink. I asked them where the Tower bit of the Tower Burger was. The cashier, who was only a little bit older than me, just didn't get it. I was so disappointed that their advertising hadn't delivered on the promise. that I took one of those little pencils and a feedback form back in the days when mega companies actually invited unprompted customer feedback, and I told them what I thought. It was years before I stepped back into a KFC. Isn't it a good idea that we deliver what's on the label, that we deliver on our promise? When I saw that the theme of this conference, whilst it was called the National Safety Convention, the byline is in practice, then that's what I thought I should deliver. So we're going to spend the next little while engaging in a few ideas about non-health and safety practices to help improve your day-to-day health and safety practice. Is that okay? So that's our first practice, which comes from the world of advertising. To keep your customers happy and coming back to you, deliver what's on your label. Deliver to them what you promise. Now, how long is a TED Talk? Wait, hang on a second. How long is this presentation? So who knows why TED Talks are 18 minutes long? There are no 18-minute slots in this conference, which I find a bit curious. Have you ever been in a situation when you get an opportunity to be in front of the people that you want to help, and then you have to work out what you're going to do with that time? I'm sure you have. I used to be like a gas. Has anyone studied physics? What's one of the properties of a gas in a container? It fills it up. Doesn't matter how big it is, it will fill the container. How often do we just fill up the time that we have instead of being really intentional about that time? And most importantly, remembering that we can probably only hold people's attention talking for 18 minutes at best. So don't talk for more than 18 minutes, ever. Is that the takeaway? Well, probably not. It's a bit more nuanced. The context of TED Talks is live audience engagement, like a conference, and online video watching. That's very much what they're trying to serve. But both of those things are passive, one-way information transfer experiences. The other practical matter is that the current owner of TED Talks, Chris Anderson, he thought it was a good idea to create content that goes on the internet in the form of the TED Talk videos that someone could digest during their lunch break at work. So that's all making sense, right? Bearing in mind all of that, I have in this slot 40-something minutes. The time doesn't really matter because we know that it's about twice what we can expect people to pay attention to if I was just going to do a one-way information download and assuming that I behave like a gas, maybe a slightly odd-smelling one, which by default expands to fill the container of time. You've probably guessed that I'm going to try not to do either of those things. And our second practice that we learned from the world of cognitive science and TED Talks, don't talk for more than 18 minutes at a go. Or if you choose to go longer, I say, break it up into chunks less than 18 minutes. How should we break it up, you ask? I'll get to that one in a second. Before I do that, coming back to delivering what's on the label, I said on the label that I would cover 19 practices, didn't I? So you'd expect me to deliver 19 things, right? Well, I have a bit of a conundrum. When I was asked to speak here today, I only knew one thing. They had a speaker who pulled out and wanted to know if I could speak. I said yes. They then asked me for a topic, which is the one that's in your program, which was months ago. Why did I choose 19, you might be thinking? Well, I actually just didn't have a lot of time to come up with a topic, so I pulled it out of thin air, thinking that it was a good balance between not too few and to be waffly, and not too many to be too brief on each of them. And hopefully memorable enough because 19 is not a round number. So after the programs were printed, I did the maths and I worked out that 19 things in 40-ish minutes was about 2 minutes per thing. And I think that seemed a little bit cheap, a little bit too light, too brief. Kind of like going to a restaurant for some tasting plates or tapas, and then you still want some dirty late night McDonald's afterwards. So here's the thing. When all is said and done, no one gives a shit whether there was 5 or 50 things that Andrew Barrett said. It's kind of the same thing with, well, most things in life. Let me explain. Has anyone heard of the drill bit analogy? Lots of people think that hardware stores sell drill bits, the curly, windy thing that you put into the end of a drill. Does anyone ever really want a drill bit? Here's a picture of one of my drill bit cases. Now, when do you think that I notice, in this particular case, that I don't have a 4.5 millimeter drill bit and I need a 4.5 millimeter drill bit? When does that happen? That only ever happens when I need a 4.5 millimeter hole. I don't care about the drill bit, I care about the hole. Your hardware store doesn't sell drill bits, they sell holes of all sorts of diameters for all sorts of materials. When we engage with something, we do it most enthusiastically when it makes our life better, when it gives us some benefit, like a neatly drilled 4.5 millimeter hole. We want the benefit, and yet most of the time, the people who can help us with this whole conundrum of ours, they focus on features. Well, this is a carbon tungsten tip drill bit. This has a 17-degree twist for clearing sawdust quicker. This reporting software at work for safety gives management up to 196 different metrics to look at. This workstation ergonomic assessment is only 5 questions and it gives you a beautiful written report. All of these things are all features. And when we get obsessed about features, we lose sight of the benefit that we're trying to deliver. So what does drill bits have to do with this talk? And how do I avoid looking like a hypocrite by not delivering what I promised with the 19 things and the 18 minutes? I thought that sharing a few less practices with you, but putting a bit more meat on them, would give you greater benefit than delivering on the promise of 19 things, which at the end of the day is really just a feature of the talk, not a benefit. Are you okay if we do it that way? So practice number 3, thanks to the world of marketing, is focus on whatever the benefits are that you can deliver to the people that you serve before obsessing over the features of whatever idea or service or solution that you are offering. How will this make their life better? Benefits before features. So let's pause for a moment after our first 3 non-health and safety practices to help you with your health and safety practice. Number 1, deliver what you promise, what's on the label. Number 2, be brief, or at least design a better communication experience if you can't fit what you're trying to do into a brief period of time. And number 3, focus on benefits before obsessing over features. Okay, so here is where I invite you to pause. And I'd love you to reflect on 2 questions. The first one is, which one of these 3 practices resonates with you the most already? Don't think about it too long. I'm really interested in you just stopping and reflecting on which one quickly comes to mind, your gut feel about it. And the second question, which I invite you to do, maybe now, maybe after you finish listening, I want you to think of an example of that practice, the one that's resonating with you the most. I want you to think of an example and I want you to write it down, and I want you to write a line. If you imagine an arrow that has 2 ends. On the one end, on the left, I want you to write, did it poorly, lesson for change. And on the other end, I want you to write, did amazing, a lesson to replicate / amplify. I want you to decide where on this line your specific example fits of that one practice that caught your attention. And I want you to talk with someone about why you picked that example and what lessons you can share. Okay, I hope you've paused after that one. You should have. If you're compliant, it's all good. I'm trying to be funny there. Anyway, so let's come back to how you can break up your communication based on the 18-minute TED Talk insight in a way that holds your audience's engagement. How do you think we can do that? Well, an easy way to do that is by involving your audience in the experience to reset energy and attention. So there are 2 very important models of success for career and for life that no one ever really gets taught, which I would like to change for you today. Would you like to know what they are? Excellent. It's a bit awkward when you do this live, when you ask a question like that, if people don't put their hands up or shake their heads. Very awkward. Anyway, it was all good. The room was engaged. So the first one, performance is an iterative outcome, I should say, of a cycle of learning and action. Learn, act, learn, act. Humans are amazing at doing this. We do it without thinking, but we're also terrible at it at the same time. So performance, which is an output of this cycle, it kind of spins out, if you imagine. You know, when you learn and act and learn and act and learn and act, it goes round and round and round and round, and performance, you know, literally ejects from it. It can be good or bad. Performance is not always good. It doesn't matter whether it's good or bad, as long as your cycle continues. And that'll make sense in a sec. So over time, you get more good and less bad because what you learn from how you act actually improves what you do next. And with that, you move towards higher and higher performance. Now, performance might mean you becoming a more effective safety professional, or it might mean the people in your organization working safely and creating successful and meaningful work. So if those are examples of performance, what is this learning aspect of this model? It's actually a bit of an abstract kind of question. So how about we think about it like this? In the room, when we did this presentation, I asked who was sitting next to a person that they worked with, or that they've worked with previously, or that they knew before today. And then that's one group. And then there's other people who are sitting next to complete strangers. So what I did is I suggested that the people who were in that first group, who were sitting with someone that they worked with or knew before today, that they get up and they go and find a stranger and they introduce themselves and they sit down. And then for the next 2 minutes, I invited them to share, as much as they were comfortable, the most impactful lesson of their entire life. So 1 minute for each of them. Now, a number of people shared their lessons once we had spent the 2 minutes with those discussions. And it was really interesting when I asked the question, what are the common defining features of those lessons? And this is a question in different kind of forms that I ask in lots of different ways with lots of different groups. And the themes are so compellingly consistent. So contemporary learning and development these days understands that learning comes from three main sources or types of learning. And they're represented by these three circles. And the size of the circles indicates conceptually the amount of learning that we get from them. So the three circles, we had a discussion about what each of these three circles look like. There's a dirty, great big circle, huge one. And then there's a much smaller one. And then there's a really tiny circle. Now this comes from the 70-20-10 model, meaning that in principle, 70% of learning comes from experience, from life, 20% comes from social interactions, and only 10% from information exchange. And that theme is pretty consistent. When you ask people the most impactful lesson of their life, it almost always consistently incorporates experiential and social learning, and very rarely does it touch on information exchange. How do you think that I've incorporated these elements, the 70-20-10 elements, into what I've done so far? So again, you're listening to a podcast right now, but in the presentation, we've got lots of interaction, people sharing experiences, meeting new people. So it's very social at the same time. So I'm focusing on the 90% part of that model right now in terms of how I'm trying to engage the room, because God knows that we're obsessed with learning already by gathering information. The experiential learning bit is enabled through new experiences and reflection, to stop and consciously ask how it's going, what's working, what's not, what's surprising, what makes sense, what's new or confusing. And we all do this unconsciously, but we can accelerate our learning and then in turn our performance if we do it more consciously or intentionally. And the social learning aspect, that's all about creating new connections and tapping into the ones you already have. Your boss, your team, people inside your organization and outside, new connections, a coach or a mentor, your mum or your dad, your sibling, your partner. People, anyone, are just an amazingly rich source of learning. Now, I should say that I don't encourage people to simply just copy what I'm doing in the way that I'm addressing this 70-20-10, this experiential, social, and information learning. After all, it's all appropriate to the context, and arguably in a session that's still delivering information, it's a pretty weak demonstration, as is a podcast. So practice number 4, in summary, is about performance. So if you want to improve performance in yourself or others in your organization, design clever learning which improves performance. And everything that you do should have learning and performance in mind. And if you are building on and drawing on elements of experiential and social learning with a little bit of informational learning in those 70-20-10 proportions, you're going to create some amazing performance. One of the most significant pieces of research in our lifetime has literally broken open one of the greatest secrets in the mindset of human performance. Now, this research was undertaken over many years, including kids from school, and then followed them into work life or life after school, and asked the question, what makes some people successful, succeed, and others not? They were obviously interested in a range of things, the sorts of things that we might normally think affects success. Socioeconomic status and education and physical and mental ability, ethnic background, emotional state, health aspects, and the list goes on. And when they talk about success, it was in a number of different aspects of their life. It's not just money, it's about happiness and health and a bunch of other things as well. So it was really quite broad. And what this research found was that success boiled down to just a few things which separated the winners from the victims of life. And what's mind-blowing is that this is almost entirely independent of all of those other factors that we usually associate with success. Oh, they came from the wrong side of town. Oh, their education wasn't as good. And of these success factors that they did identify, the most powerful one comes down to just a single word in the English language that successful people use and others do not. That word is yet. I can't get these managers to take safety seriously. Yet. I haven't managed to arrange any quality time with the general manager. Yet. I don't have the kind of relationship with the operations team to effectively influence their budget spend. Yet. Carol Dweck was the lady's name who led the team of researchers. She coined this term to describe people who don't use yet and those who do. A fixed mindset doesn't use the word yet, and a growth mindset does. So whilst that's a complicated piece of research, and it goes much deeper than that, these three letters could be all of the difference that makes between a balanced and striving and effective career and an anxious, apathetic or average career. So practice number 5, which comes from psychology, is to encourage in yourself and others a growth mindset. And if you don't dive into Carol Dweck's work, of which there's some really good summaries and videos on the internet, at very least, I encourage you to start using that tiny but powerful word, yet. Has anyone heard of Google Glass? We'll get some feedback from the audience about this when we had the discussion in real time. So we made sure that we understood what Google Glass is, and the visuals show you what they look like. So Google Glass is a very new and different type of technology. It's literally as different to a smartphone as a smartphone was to your old home phone. So have a guess how long it took this team of engineers to create the prototype for the Google Glass product. It was 1 day. Not a year, not months, not days. They created it in less than 1 day. And this is what it looked like. There's a picture. They took some wire and a micro projector, a little bit of perspex, and they connected it to a computer and they hooked it onto their head. Now, it's not very sexy as a product, you might be thinking, and maybe that's why this product didn't take off in at least the consumer market like a rocket. The point is that I'm trying to make is that this is their first prototype, the literal first creation of one aspect of their idea into the physical world. All of us have ideas, and ideas are kind of like a commodity, like there's no shortage of them. And many of these ideas might seem too crazy to ever work. But the gap between an idea and reality is not represented by the final product. It's actually the first, smallest, cheapest, and simplest prototype that you can create. It doesn't have to be a physical product, although prototyping works really well if you have ideas for physical products. It could be digital. If you want a better interface for your online safety database or reporting or whatever, get a piece of paper and draw out what you want it to look like, and you've got your first prototype. Far too often, we don't achieve improvement because we never get started on a good idea, because it seems too hard, too far away. Practice number 6, which we can learn from Google Glass, is to prototype your ideas into reality. Google Glass became a reality in a single day, so imagine what you can embark on. My last real job before I became a business owner and an entrepreneur was a result of a restructure. I was in a national role at the National Broadband Network, which is helping to build the largest infrastructure project in Australia's history. My original role had been split up across a few roles, and the general manager, the head of safety at the time, said, "Where do you want to go?" It's interesting because that's a very different question, I should say, to where did I need to go versus where I wanted to go in terms of my needs versus the business needs. Long story short, I ended up in a bit of a lone wolf kind of role, leading the entire safety and environment in design strategy for the whole of the NBN project. The irony is that they created that job in large part because of all of the influence that I had had in years prior when there was no adequate resourcing or strategy for safe design in that context, which was kind of ironic given that we were 5 years into the project at that stage. It was a bit piecemeal before then. I had told the GM at the time that I gave myself 12 months to get this sorted out, ready for a business as usual transition, and then I'd be out of there. But by then, I'd already figured out how I was going to tackle this mammoth challenge. Given that NBN is basically a design, construction and operation business, plus all of the support functions, I had to influence the direction of roughly a quarter of the business with a team of one, me, solo, numero uno. So my plan was what authors Chip and Dan Heath from their book Switch call finding the bright spots. I didn't have time to implement the usual complicated safety approach to this, the full plan that addresses everything. I needed fast results. So I looked for the bright spots, the people, the practices, and the results which were already good in order to study them. Of all of the things that I could have pushed as good health and safety, in inverted commas, some compliance assessment or gap analysis or a new process or procedure or education or training, the single biggest factor in great design outcomes was a personal relationship between the engineers and the operations people. Not just familiar, it was a good relationship. I can explain why I thought that was the case if you would like to have a discussion with me later on about it. But the important bit was it was a bright spot. So apart from all of the nitty-gritty things that I did, encouraging and enhancing the good relationship between the engineers and operations people became one of my top priorities. I facilitated introductions, arranged social catch-ups, helped find things of common interest or background. Because if that was a strong relationship, we had better design outcomes. So, non-health and safety practice number 7, thanks to change leadership research, is to drive successful change, find the bright spots, and replicate those. One of my kids broke her collarbone recently jumping off a bed onto a wooden floor. And it must be genetic because about the same age, I ended up jumping off a playground bridge and broke my collarbone. Anyway, I realised that the first question that we asked her was exactly the same question that the doctor asked her. Now, she wasn't particularly chatty by the time we got to the hospital, so she didn't have an answer for the doctor, but she did tell us. Do you know what that question was? The question was, where does it hurt? In other words, where is the pain? For decades, this question has been one of the most frequent uttered by doctors and, in more recent times, by marketing professionals. Where is the pain? Where does it hurt? What's the problem? Now, modern-day marketing has evolved from the less illustrious salespeople of yesteryear, namely because the response to the question of where is your pain, irrespective of the answer, usually results in the same product or solution being presented. Oh, actually, that's right. That's still how lots of consultants, especially in the culture change space, work. It's a bit awkward for them. If we're starting fresh in a new job, a new leader at work, a new boss, a new site, whatever it is, practice number 8 that we can learn from our esteemed medical colleagues and good marketing practice is that it's always a good idea to start with understanding their pain, which makes diagnosis and prescription much easier. And not surprisingly, the people that we're trying to help are likely to be happier when they feel like they have been heard.
I've given you almost the entire lion's share of the 19 already. And how did I do that? We talked about 5 points, but I've done all of these things. So in the last couple of minutes, do you want to have a chat about any of these things? Be a ninja? Okay, cool. So, does anyone know about samurais and ninjas? Anyone from Japan or been to Japan before? Okay, cool. So do you know the difference between samurais and ninjas?
No idea.
The main difference between samurais and ninjas, apart from the fact that there are turtles, like totally cool ninjas, and there's no real famous samurais, is that the ninjas were the Japanese warriors who did not follow the Bushido, the code of the warrior, which is what samurais did. And so what's one of the things that samurais are most famous for? If they get defeated, what do? Harikari, they kill themselves, right? Ninjas weren't worried about that, they just go on to the next one, right? So this code was something that they just threw out the window because the rules weren't serving them. And so when people talk about being a ninja, I encourage you to do things that actually influence people and send messages and shake things up a little bit without other people even realising. That's a clever way to do it. And so when I talked about 19 things and I thought, shit, how am I going to not be a hypocrite with this thing? I thought, well, how about I actually try and build close to the 19 things into my presentation, even though they didn't come out of my mouth explicitly. That's kind of an experiential way to learn, isn't it? It's clever, isn't it? Okay, do you want to talk about any of the other ones on there? Now remember, these are all non-health and safety practices, right? So these are things that you can all do. Do the opposite. Cool, okay. So, how was the room set up initially? Facing the front. And so I could have got you to face the back, but that might have been a little bit odd. You might have had a neck problem with the presentation. So as an innovation principle, just asking yourself, what if we did the opposite, is actually a really, really good way to break you out of your default thinking, out of your status quo, okay? So has anyone got any examples of where you've done the opposite in your practical day-to-day work? To do the opposite, which is you're going the opposite, that's the default. Cool. A really, really common one with health and safety people is that we say, if we use paper-based health and safety systems, what are we going to do? Ditch the paper, right? So that's a really simple example. Are there any other examples that anyone's got of doing the opposite? I did the opposite in my presentation because I usually don't speak with notes, and so that was one of the things that I did.
When I was in rail corp, we had to do toolbox talks. They were really boring. And so what I did, I asked the blokes in the workshop to come up and give a talk for 5 minutes on their hobby. One was a motorbike rider, one was like a scuba diver, another one was a sailor, and then we got into the toolbox part of it.
Yeah.
Changed the whole concept.
Yeah.
Because they were talking about what they love.
Absolutely. It's interesting. In Darren Hill's presentation, what was that slogan that they sprayed on the long wall? Finish strong, right? What was that trying to contribute to? What was the outcome they were working on in his program? Shut down, but what? Like what kind of shutdown? Was it going to be a shutdown? But it was a health and safety initiative, right? Fundamentally. So how often do we talk about health and safety with a health and safety label? And what happens when we talk about with things with health and safety on them? Oh, this is a health and safety. They said you can't have as many people in the room because it's a health and safety thing. So opposite thinking is stop talking about health and safety. Yeah? Start making success in your business something, and then be a ninja and influence health and safety outcomes through that process. Anything else? Anyone on there want to talk about? 80-20? Yeah, cool. So I sort of went 19 things, 2 minutes on each one. I kind of went, I think that's a little bit light. So the 80-20, I went through these 19 things and I thought, how can I actually bring these things to life in a way that kind of suits this environment with this audience in the time that we've got, so that that's going to have the most impact, so that you don't feel like you've been cheated. So that's kind of an 80-20 thing. I think there's a lot of 80-20 stuff, 80-20 thinking that can go into times of contraction in businesses. So we were talking, Bryce, last night about Origin, and with the contraction in the market and then the downsizing that's going on in Origin. And what does it force you to do?
Keep that full time.
Be what?
Keep that full time.
Be that full time. Need to redundancy. So that's one thing that you can do. But it forces you to actually go, well, what are the really, really important things that we've got to do here, right? Why do we only ever think of that when it's time to contract? Why don't we actually go, well, what are the really meaningful things that we've got to do here? And then we can just focus on those things, yeah? Some people might call that lean. That's kind of get rid of waste in your process. You know, that's kind of an analogy that some people might identify with. Anything else on there? We've probably got 1 minute to go. Crowdsource. Cool. So this kind of ties in with that social learning component, right? It's the idea that, like I said at the beginning, why was I not going to stand up in front of the room? Well, because it's conventional, but also because I'm not the source of all the learning that's going to happen in this session. And I think that, how many of you go around going, I'm not the health and safety expert here? Yeah? You are the health and safety expert, the people who do the work. It's kind of a safety two, safety differently principle. So it's that idea of actually going, well, let's use social learning to crowdsource whatever it is that we're trying to achieve. And so what I try to do is to build into the work that I do, drawing on the experience, the relevance, the insights, the ideas, the challenges, even the negative feedback from everyone else, because that makes for a richer experience. I could have talked about one case study, for example, about the top, when we did that discussion with your friend, I could have talked about a case study of that, and you would have got a sample of one. Instead of you actually having a social conversation with someone who you learn now, you've got a bit of a stronger relationship with them, you might even go and continue the conversation with them outside, and then you might have a relationship like Kevin's relationship and mine that continues to give you value for years and years. So that's kind of that crowdsourcing idea. Anything else? Or should we call it?
What was your strategy? Always have a strategy.
Always have a strategy. So I'm from Safety on Tap, and our mission at Safety on Tap is what we create effectively is for leaders who want to grow themselves and drastically improve health and safety along the way. And so I come to events like this, which take a bucket load of time and energy to prepare for. I'm speaking today, I'm speaking tomorrow, I'm emceeing breakfast tomorrow. I do all of this stuff because the health and safety profession is at the core of the mission in my business. And so in the work that we do, producing podcasts and videos and content, all free, that any of you can access if you like to listen or watch stuff online, all on demand, globally accessible, that's a core part of my mission. Coming and talking to people in rooms like this is a core part of my mission, because I'm trying to help people be, what was the last bit, what was the benefit of this presentation? Better safety professionals. So that's the strategy that exists in this presentation. It might sound really altruistic, but that's my business. This is what I do. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning. That's my ikigai, my reason for being. And so that was my strategy of being here today. And so I think often, when we talk about the gas, here's your slot, what are you going to talk about? You've got to be really intentional. You've got to have a strategy about what you're going to talk about, yeah? And then you can use some of these other things. You can be a ninja. You can use some analogies and tell stories and be visual. And you can use all of those things in line with your strategy in order to help the people that you're trying to serve. So I might leave it there. I love chatting to people. I am actually really good at listening as well, believe it or not. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope to meet some of you outside.
This was a really visual presentation, so I invite you to check out the video, which has all of the rich imagery that went along with this presentation, and hopefully that'll make your listening experience even better. Thanks to TD99210 for the 5-star iTunes review recently, entitled Future Focus. They said, "Thank you for always bringing inspiring, innovative and future-focused presenters. They challenge and motivate me to be the type of safety professional that has impact, that actually makes a difference. Bravo." Thank you, TD99210. You embody my mission here at Safety on Tap beautifully. I love hearing from you, and reviews help other people find the podcast. Why not jump onto iTunes and let me know what you think? This was an episode full of tips, so no additional takeaways required from me. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, what's the one thing you'll do to take positive, effective, or rewarding action to grow yourself and drastically improve health and safety along the way? See ya.